Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time today. My name is Swafia Ames. I'm from an organization called Brighter Strategies. And today, if you're all on the right plane, we're talking about keeping your employees engaged during COVID-19. I hope, especially with a smaller group of people, that we can have a more interactive conversation. Feel free, since it's just a handful of us, do they have the capability of turning their cameras on? Laura, yes. So you all have the opportunity to turn. Yeah, there we go. We see people. Hi, everyone. And my just full disclosure, my colleague David is on as well. So this is actually cooler than I thought it would be, because I thought I'd be talking to myself. But this is awesome. So hopefully, what we can have is a very interactive conversation. For me, collaboration brings inspiration, and I always say, I know what I know about engagement and communication and culture and all this cool stuff, but I don't know what y'all know. So hopefully we can have a good conversation. So let's get moving. Oh crap, I'm in the wrong screen. Bear with me, people, technical difficulties. All right, so just a little bit about me. As I said, I work for an organization called Brighter Strategies. We're a boutique style organizational development firm that focuses on collaborating with mission and socially driven organizations to really develop and implement a host of organizational development programming. My particular area of focus and my sweet spot is really around human capital. So people within those organizational systems and how they're functioning and working towards the ultimate goal. And within all of that, one of my sort of passions is really around sort of equitable and inclusive workplace practices and just culture and transformational change in organizations. And how that affects people. So today, I'm always in the wrong screen here, we're really going to be focusing on the concept of engagement. And for me, I always like to start with, well, what is engagement? Making sure we're all really talking about the same thing here. And because I think collaborating is important, I want to hear what's working for you all, what recent experiences you all are having in your organization, and just share respective organizations, and just share some suggestions and ideas that we have been sharing with our clients and also ourselves, right? Because Brighter Strategies is also virtual, much like most of the world. And we're also working with clients as they are virtual. So just really want to see if we can share ideas. So, and of course, if there are any questions or thoughts you have, put them in the chat, or just, maybe just raise your hand, because it's just a few of us. And Laura's going to be helping me here on the technical side. So, all right. Any questions before we get started? No? All right. So let's roll. So what I thought we would start with, Laura, if you could run our first poll, which is really about just a pre-COVID engagement. So what would you all say? It's already up here on the screen. How engaged would you say your workforce was pre-COVID? No right or wrong answers here. Oh, good. That's good. That's good stuff. All right. So you're going to have all the answers for this session, and I'm going to probably walk away learning more than I can teach you. So when we think about engagement, when I define engagement specifically, and cool. So when you think about, and again, I definitely want to see if we can pull in some conversation. So when we define, from an OD perspective, when we define employee engagement, we're thinking about it as just encompassing more than just the satisfaction or employee happiness. Obviously, that's important, right? It's also this emotional commitment within that level of happiness to the employee has to actually achieving the organization's goals, right? So yes, I'm happy, I love being here, but I'm also focused and connected to the mission and the vision of the organization and the duties and responsibilities and the goals and objectives that I have around my individual performance and my individual execution of my role really aligns with what the organization wants, right? So when those things are not in alignment, then sometimes, yeah, I'm happy, but maybe you're not happy as my supervisor, and vice versa, right? So making sure that alignment exists. Okay, make sure, there we go. So when I think about engagement, when I talk about it, I think about it in two parts, right? There's a high level of motivation, and then there's a high level of connectivity, which brings together high levels of engagement. And what does that look like, and how does that really sort of manifest, right? When you think about employees that are highly engaged, you're thinking that there's a high level of service, quality, productivity, output. Things are happening, things are moving, things are driving us towards our mission in a very positive way, right? We have general satisfaction from whoever our target demographics are. We're meeting goals, we're serving the community, we're making policy changes, we're really seeing positive outcomes, right, through this high level of engagement. So mission achievement. There's organizational impact, right? We know that our employees are working along the lines of the mission, so the organization is having good impact, our stakeholders are happy, we're able to really demonstrate our value proposition in our communities or wherever we're working, and then we're seeing that return, whether that's through these positive outcomes, donor satisfaction, whatever we're saying that we're trying to achieve. Like when we have our workforces driving us in the right direction, we're going to see those positive outcomes, right? And the organization's going to have a good reputation. People are going to want to come and work for the organization, or you're going to be able to retain your top talent, right? You're going to be able to keep those folks that are helping you achieve your mission in your workforce. So there's a couple ways to think about the high motivation piece, right? And there's a lot of different research out there, but one of the researchers that I like, an author, is Daniel Pink. He wrote a book called Drive about motivation. And there's this idea, when you think about motivation, there's these two pieces. There's intrinsic, which are the things you don't really see that are pushing you and driving you to do what you're doing. And then there's extrinsic, which are the things like in a workplace that might be a salary, your title, or some sort of reward or recognition. And what we know from this research in the behavioral psychology space is that people tend to be more motivated by intrinsic values. So things that are near and dear to them internally, like again, that you may not necessarily see. So you might think giving people a higher salary or a loftier title is going to make them be more engaged and be more productive. But we know from research that that's not true. So when you think about high motivation, I love the way Daniel Pink describes it. There's these three components, right? First and foremost is autonomy. And autonomy really speaks to the individual's ability to really sort of set their own course, right? I have control and leverage and thought leadership about how I'm doing what I'm doing, right? So if you think of it in the sort of parent-child dynamic, and maybe this is not the right example for the group, I'm not sure what everybody's demographic is, but even if, as when you were a child and there were things that, your parents wanted you to do, and they would direct those things to you, they were sometimes in one ear and out the other. But when you started to mature and you would have more responsibility, and they'd be like, listen, these are the guidelines, these are parameters, come up with a plan, let me know what it is. You felt more, at least I did, you felt more excited and committed to being home on time because they were giving you some leeway in sort of how you were able to sort of function. And it really works the same way in the workplace. Figuring out as an organization how to provide your employees with some autonomy around how they do what they do increases levels of engagement, right? So instead of saying, here, you have to use, this particular platform, maybe that there are some sort of mandated things that have to happen, but how they function within the space or how they interact with that platform, or maybe the ability to identify new ways of doing what they do really sort of drives motivation. The other thing is mastery. And again, this ties to how they are developing as a professional, right? What are some of the coaching, training, development opportunities that people have to master their area, right? How are you providing space and opportunities for the folks in your workforce to be able to direct their professional path in a very structured way, as I say, to make sure that people are moving in the direction of the mission and that I'm not off learning how to knit, but you need me to be learning to do something else that drives the mission. So really just kind of figuring out what that is and giving people some control over that so that they continue to be engaged. And then this idea of purpose, really, I always describe it as what is feeding my soul, right? What are the things that are happening, that I'm doing around how I'm, sort of leading and directing my professional path that makes me feel good about the work that I'm doing in the place that I'm doing the work. So those are sort of the three big components that tie into high motivation, right? And so this idea of autonomy, mastery, and purpose, and we'll try to draw those back in as we move through the conversation here. But that seems to be for us, especially as we sort of engage with our clients, some of the challenges is that the relationship at times can feel very directive. There's not a lot of flexibility and space for autonomy. We sometimes hear this conversation about, oh, the millennials and they want this and we've done it this way. And, so just really sort of loosening that up a little bit to make space for motivation. And I do want to pause for a second, especially for those of you that said that you have very high engagement with your workforce. I would love to hear how these concepts are sort of landing, and are there elements of this that you see that are contributing to your high level of motivation? So who said that they had a highly engaged worker? Okay, do you mind?
Yeah, I work for Power. It's a substance abuse treatment organization. And so everybody pretty much that works for us is very, very passionate about what we do. We have a large part of our staff is in recovery themselves. And so there's, everybody definitely feels very strongly about what we do. And you can see that in their commitment and in their engagement.
Yeah. And you feel like within those roles that there's that level of autonomy to sort of chart their own path about how they're doing what they're doing?
To a certain extent. I mean, there's very much between therapy and mentoring and those kinds of things. A lot of those services are relationship based. So there's going to be autonomy, right? There's going to be from one provider to, from one client provider relationship to another, there's going to be autonomy. So there's definitely, some structure, or not structure maybe, but some guidelines, and tools and things like that we provide and recommend that they use. But there's definitely, I think, some autonomy in how they deliver their specific services to each client. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Anybody else that said that they had a very engaged workforce want to share? All right, so we'll keep moving. Oh, did I miss something? Oh, go ahead.
There's always just this delay with me trying to find my mute thing to unmute. So I'm Jackie, Jacksonville Speech and Hearing Center in Florida, and I try to make it my plan and my mission to always hire people who are a lot smarter and more talented than I am, and so it really works out that they are autonomous because of that. And they are engaged, and it's been a lot more interesting now going to the virtual environment and everyone working from home, and if anything, I feel less engaged with them because we're not always together, and so that's been challenging.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that, Jackie. And there is this sort of idea that we have to be a lot more intentional about how we connect with folks, because it's just not the same as we were all in the same office, or we would meet up at even for virtual teams like Brighter Strategies, that we would meet on site, or we would, have these opportunities to connect. So yeah, I think we're all, even though we're all in the same ocean right now, we might be in different boats, but I think there's some similarities there. All right, so let me make sure this is going to move. No, it's not the right button. There it is. Okay, so the other piece of the puzzle here is this idea around high connectivity. And so this idea, the other half of that sort of engagement equation is really about that sort of human need for belonging, right? Having a friend or a tribe is the word that I actually like to use at work, and just increases that, your happiness and lowers your stress. And, in my sort of early career, I worked at large law firms, and that's a very sort of high pressured environment, a lot of hours, a lot of, obviously client service. There's a lot of layers to that organization with the lawyers and the paralegal and the staff. And one of the things that really sort of transcended everything was that, we were all in this sort of, pressure pot together. and that we were almost all like, even some of the staff and some of the attorneys, I'm a non-attorney, but I worked on the sort of human capital side, was that one of the associates used to say, hey, we're all miserable together. So everybody was working late, everybody was, you know, dealing with some of the demands of the industry and the partners. And it just felt good. It didn't feel like you were alone. And it felt like, even though you spent a lot of hours at work, there was this really cool, dynamic group of folks that made it feel that much easier to sort of get through some of the not so nice times and the higher stress times, because, you know, you had this sort of, you know, as I say, the work tribe that kind of got you through there. And there's a lot of research about this, and Laura will share the deck, so feel free to sort of follow up and drill down on some of these concepts and ideas. But this idea of really feeling connected to your work group and feeling like you all have some common goals and you have folks to fall back on. I want to do it right this time. Yes, I did. So here's another opportunity here for our next poll is I wanted to hear what's happening now that we're all in this sort of post-quarantine. And a lot of my clients, when I talk to them, they was this sort of pre-COVID, we're all in the workspace. And now, Laura, if you could tee up that second poll for me, just in terms of, you know, now that we are definitely kind of in this space, what's happening now? Okay, so a little different.
Sorry, I can't tell. The words are like slightly cut off, but it says, what is your employee and coworker engagement now?
Yeah.
For some reason, engagement now is.
Oh, right, it is missing. I see that now. I read slower than Laura, sorry. It's missing. Okay, slightly.
Okay, we almost have everyone that's voted.
Yeah, okay, cool. So if you can publish that, if everyone's already, yeah, we don't have to wait for the full timer. Okay. All right. Okay, perfect. Yeah, so it definitely feels a little different, right? So let's talk about that. For those that are not engaged at all or only slightly engaged, I know this is a small group, not to put anybody on blast, but does anybody feel comfortable sharing like where they feel like there might be a disconnect at this point? Is it just, Jackie, I heard you mention could just be the distance and not seeing people every day?
I'm happy to talk. I think for us, it's definitely the distance. Like, we are such a small team, and like we really like thrived on the daily check-ins. And, like, sorry, that's my dog. Just like checking in with one another and like sitting at each other's desks. So I think for a lot of them, I have a lot of really young staff. They're really close friends, and I think that that's where they're missing that social interaction that I just can't replicate. Even though we're on Zoom every week, you just can't replicate it.
That's true. That's a challenge that we all have, and I have a dog too. So trust me. If you hear any woofing, I don't know, that might happen.
I thought someone was being murdered for a second. That was hard.
No. And anybody else? What about the slightly engaged? What is happening? Because if they're slight, that means there's maybe some good stuff happening still. Who said that?
I said that, and it's been the biggest change, because I originally said we were very engaged, and now I would say slightly, and I think it's because, you know, we still have that purpose. And on the smaller level, everybody's engaged with their immediate teams through Zoom and stuff like that. But we haven't been able to have all agency meetings. We're not meeting in the, you know, crossing paths in the hallways or the break rooms or anything like that. So that's just made, I think, a really big difference. Okay.
Yeah. No, and as we sort of start here, as we've kind of sort of established some of the challenges, what we'll start talking about next, and hopefully if I click this the right way, no, it's not clicking. There we go. It's gonna go now. There we go. Just talk about some areas that we are actually focusing on with our clients, and things that we're, even, as I said, as Brighter Strategies is a remote team, the things that we're focusing on as well. So here are some of the ideas and things that we're sharing, and we're gonna break into each of these. It's just really setting some new goals and expectations around how you're operating as a team, even individual expectations for your individual members of your workforce. And again, that might change or be the same and just sort of be approached differently. This idea of flexibility, which is not a new concept at all, but definitely something that I think as a nation, we've had to be more flexible, right? And you know, a lot of it's ironic because a lot of the work I do, as I said, human capital space, and sometimes in the HR transaction space, is, you know, trying to get employers before to even think about offering some remote work options, or, you know, a flexible schedule, and you know, now all of a sudden, like literally in March, like the entire, you know, U.S. workforce pivoted, you know, with the exception of some essential workers, obviously, but there was a huge pivot. So there's a lot of ideas around embracing flexibility. And then, you know, to your point, Jackie, around this idea of just how we are connecting with people, being very deliberate in our communications now, and not having the fallback of, oh, I'll see David tomorrow, or I'm going to see him when we go, you know, to this client side, and then we're going to go have a drink afterwards, or, you know, you've lost some of that because of social distancing and the fact that we're just not all in the office. And depending on sort of who you are and what your situation is, you may not be wanting to leave the house or interacting even with a mask on, right? So just there's some thoughts there. And that ties right into this idea of just your existing culture. You know, how do you cultivate and foster a remote office culture, organizational culture, right? In terms of the values and the behaviors and norms that the foundational values and principles that your organization typically operated under, right? So we're gonna tackle each one of these, and then to the extent that that there are some things that are working for your respective organizations, or you have an idea that you want to throw out, and maybe the team here, this group, can unpack it and offer you some insights. I think this for me is really where the magic happens in terms of what y'all know compared to what I know. So feel free to jump in on, and I'll continue to call on folks. All right, there it is. Okay, so we talked about this idea of, first and foremost, just new goals and expectations, right? And so, you know, if you can kind of think about sort of the current reality, and it really is different for every organization. So it's like the top of this, hopefully this is moving in the right place. Yeah, so the top of this road, right? And then there's all these sort of unknowns in the middle, but ultimately, you know, organizations, we're all still focused on whatever the core mission is, right? So what needs to be sort of reimagined is, you know, what happens along the way, right? So how are we doing what we're doing now? So understanding that, okay, as a work team, as an organization, we're still trying to get to the mission, but the fact that we've got these nuances connected to our workforce, where people are working from home, they might have you know, sort of limited resources. We really need to rethink how are we doing what we do now. So if you can think about your sort of annual goal setting process, right? If you're all doing that, which is really tied to around sort of goals and objectives and what the strategy of the organization is, what are sort of the key sort of activities and actions should I now be doing based on this new normal, right? So really sort of having a conversation, creating a list, track what's changed, you know, what's changed, what's remained the same, and, you know, what are causing challenges, and then having some conversations that really unpack that in a meaningful way. And like I said, I sort of tie it into whatever model you're using for goal setting, which most people typically use like some sort of SMART goal model, or whether they use MOCA for decision making. So whatever your jam is, right? Just rethink it, like really rethink it, sit down and write it out and come up with a new sort of way forward. And then once you sort of figure out, okay, here's what we need to be doing, here's what we are sort of striving towards now based on these new limitations, how are we going to measure success and track our outcomes, right? And so what are the new key performance indicators that we should be sort of holding ourselves accountable to, or holding our work teams accountable to, right? And we've got embedded in this presentation, we've got a worksheet that's also on our website that you can use just to sort of guide your conversation, right? Because it can feel clunky. It can feel, if it's not something that you normally do, but just really sort of ask those questions, especially those of you with like smaller leadership teams or smaller organizations, like just get everybody on a Zoom, put them in the gallery view, and let's have a roundtable discussion about sort of, needs. If that's not the way, I've had clients that do like SurveyMonkey surveys, asking very specific questions of people, hey, what do you need? Do you have access to this? Do you need that? Or in the one-on-one format, but just put some intention around it. And so I want to pause for a moment and just check in with the group to see, have you had to set new goals and expectations, and have you had some success, or what hasn't worked, or what advice do you have for the group? Does anybody have an experience or story to share about has anybody reset some expectations and adjusted sort of whether it's the organization's goals or individual goals for your work teams? No? So definitely something to think about. In terms of, as an organization, we're still focused on this mission. How can we do what we're doing a little differently? So definitely something to think about. And the evaluation worksheet will probably definitely be super helpful to y'all. So this idea of embracing flexibility, it seems so simple, but and I actually want to applaud. I've encountered a lot of our clients and that have been very supportive of this idea of flexibility, right? And we know that everyone's dealing with some different situation depending on the demographic of your workforce. You might have some folks that are homeschooling their children. You might have a situation where you've got two people that are working, that are sharing the same space. Some people, we've learned just along this journey, don't always have all of the resources at home, whether that's a computer, access to Wi-Fi, access to equipment to be able to actually do their jobs, if they're even fortunate to be able to do their jobs at home. So I think it's super important to just, again, as you're setting these goals and expectations with your workforce, just ask them that, what does a schedule look like? What does a new normal look like? When does it make sense for you to actually be working on, organizational projects? And how does that feel? Is it, I had a colleague that, because she lost daycare, her and her husband split the shift, right? So he would do the mornings and she would come online at noon and stay online till 8. So they really split it up because they have 2 children under the age of 5. And so that created a dynamic for them. I still have, he hasn't left me yet, a kid in high school, and I had to homeschool him, which was the worst job ever. I was like, please give every teacher in America a raise. But, I had to sort of get him focused and together. And so, whereas before I would be like more engaged in the morning, my day started, after 9:30 because he had to be logged in by 8 o'clock. So I had to get him up and get him, together, which was a shift for us because normally he's the first person up and out the door and mom, let's go. So it was definitely a shift for everyone. So really thinking about your core working times, and then just being mindful of this idea of the work-life balance, which I feel has gone out the window a little bit, but again, being intentional. And the key here is really to ask, ask people what they need. Let's not make any assumptions. Let's have a conversation. And then to the extent that you don't already have a policy in place, we have just a sample policy that does need some customization. But I want to pause for a second and just see if the group is willing to share what they've done around flexibility for their workforce and how this has played out in terms of, even maybe seeing a shift in engagement if people don't feel like they've got that flexibility.
Our team actually makes their own schedules. It has to be approved by their supervisor, but we give them the flexibility of making their own schedules as long as it ensures that we have shift coverage to cover the residents.
And was that something that came out of the remote work situation, COVID, or was that something that was always part of the organization?
It's always been part of our organization. As far as COVID goes, working remotely, we've given them the opportunity. They can either go into the offices or work from home. Except for, of course, our residential assistants, because we are recovery residents. Mm-hmm. But I mean, we try to accommodate what the team needs as well as what the resident needs.
Yeah. And you feel like that's obviously it's something that was existing before, but you feel like that's been successful in terms of keeping to your point, the coverage that you need. Yeah. All right. Anybody else want to share about flexibility, things that have worked for your organization?
For us, something it's more interesting than anything. So we're a clinic. Our organization is a clinic. So obviously, people who work in the clinic setting have to be there at a certain time to see patients. You know, they have to unlock the door, see patients. Whereas I'm the development officer and I lead development, marketing, outreach, communications. So my team can do their work anywhere, anytime. And it wasn't really anything we gave a thought to before because we work weekends, we work nights, we're at events, we're setting things up. I mean, it's such a constant whirlwind. Then the whole world shut down and our clinic closed for a little while, but now it's back up. But my team's still able to work from home. And have totally, I mean, if you're writing a grant, sometimes people know you're doing a proposal till 3 a.m. in the morning, so that you're getting it in at 8 a.m. the next morning and taking a nap. And so it makes me sometimes just feel weird. Like it was something I never even noticed before, but now these people, they've got to be there 7:30 a.m. at the clinic and we're off doing kind of our own thing. It's just an interesting. And one of my staff members is immunocompromised, and so we're being very cautious about staying away from the office and keeping everyone safe. So it's just, I don't know, it's just more of a comment, I guess, of the dynamic of the overall organization and how it feels a little strange now.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think the real sort of interesting sort of dynamic is going to happen once things go back to quote unquote normal, how flexible people remain, right? Because it's like you can't unring the bell. You're not putting that horse back in the barn. You know what I mean? So on some level, and I have had conversations with clients that, in addition to just from an operational perspective, that even rethinking their space and do we really need all of the space that we have now? And in terms of having all these bodies in a brick and mortar office and what that can look and feel like and resourcing and allocation and things of that nature. So I think the real conversation around flexibility is going to hit its peak once we have moved out of the pandemic phase and there's some sort of vaccine or whatever they're calling it these days. I can't even keep up with the news, but probably more 2021, but what does that look like? And so, just from your vantage point, just for the folks on this call, do you see maintaining the same level of remote accessibility and flexibility, or do you see, no, we're just waiting for the all clear and everybody's back in their seats in their offices?
I think it's going to be a hybrid, honestly, because even for me, I go in probably 3 days a week just because I need to work with accounting and everything, and I like the combination. I have some staff that do really well working from home, but they never have to, like the grant writer. She can do whatever she needs to do wherever she is. So, but other things, I see it because we just collaborate more when we're in the office together. So I see it going forward as a hybrid. I don't see us ever going back to full-time butt in the seat at 8 a.m. till 5 p.m., honestly.
Mm-hmm.
I think the world's changed. And I think we know we can do it now, just kind of like we do teletherapy now at the clinic. We always knew we could do it. There was nothing that forced us to do it, but now we've invested in the technology, just like we've invested in laptops and everything. We've invested in it. We've proven we can do it. There's really no reason to go completely back to the way things were.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. Does anybody have a different view or a different thought on that?
So I think it's going to obviously be very dependent upon each individual agency and organization. Obviously, if you have a clinic or anything similar to that, you're going to need to have some level of in-person interaction. My wife is a therapist as well, and she's having to do telehealth at home, but she really misses the in-person interaction. Some clients just need to be seen in person. for me in my organization, we obviously work with schools and community-based organizations because we do cooking and nutrition education programs. So the programs themselves have to be done in person in most instances. I mean, we've definitely pivoted and shifted to doing them in a virtual setting as much as we possibly can, but there's only so much you can do. So we're eventually looking forward to the point where we can do those programs in person, but we don't actually have them come to any kind of facility that we have. We bring the program to them. That's always kind of been our model. And so I think everything with COVID has just further amplified the fact that we had been doing it that way for a while, and we technically had some offices, but it became very apparent very quickly that we were wasting money on rent that we didn't necessarily have to be spending, because the administration of the program and everything else associated with that, anyone can do from anywhere they are. There's no real need to be in person to have that call to organize about what you're going to be doing with a particular partner, what grant you need to write. You can do that from wherever it is, as long as you have the right technology and tools.
Absolutely. And that's such a valid point, and to sort of really think thoughtfully about the target demographic, what types of services you're offering and what needs to be, whether operated out of an office or brought on site to the actual client themselves, is important. And yeah, I agree. Depending on the sort of individual, to have that hybrid is going to be critical. And I think you got to find the silver lining in everything. I always say, just kind of opens up some new sort of thought processes and ideas for organizations and leaders to think differently about delivering the services that they're trying to deliver. So yeah, I think flexibility is going to be important. I was in a conversation earlier where I talked about, like, even when I think it was Jackie's dog that was barking, that's just not weird anymore. You know what I mean? And I think back to, maybe it was 2 years ago, the big story was the CNN correspondent that his daughter came into the room, and the wife crawled into the room and grabbed the daughter out, and everybody's like, oh, well, they're working from home, and and now it's like no big deal. People walk by, dogs bark, people are holding up babies in work meetings, and it's the new normal. And I don't know that it's that horrible. Like I said, depending on your organization and sort of individual needs, I think there's a hybrid here happening. So awesome. So yeah, so feel free to check out this this flexible work schedule policy. It's very standard. It would need to be customized, but if you're not already formulating a dialogue and a conversation, or thinking about how this all looks and feels when we go back into the offices, that might be a resource that could be helpful for the folks on this call. All right, so let me see if I'm doing this right. Boom. All right, deliberate communications plan, and this is important, right? So there has to be some real frequent contact touch points that make sense, that are not that are sort of intentional and relevant. And I've heard like Zoom fatigue. I know when for me personally, and a lot of the folks that I network and connect with, when we first went into quote unquote quarantine, there were tons of Zoom. We were doing Zoom happy hours. There were Zoom dance parties. There were all these cool things, and now it's like you can barely get somebody on FaceTime. We spend so much time in front of our screens. But I think there's definitely, from a work perspective, you've got to figure out what makes sense, scheduling check-ins with supervisors and coworkers, and structuring those in a way that makes sense, right? There still is this concept of death by meeting. And so when there's too many meetings, especially when they're not structured and focused, it can feel frustrating. So with Brighter Strategy, some of the things that we do, even sort of internally, and what we advise to our clients, is to just put a standing check-in on the calendar, whether that's weekly or bi-weekly. Always have a short agenda around it. For us, it usually revolves around the various projects that we're working on. And then if I'm supervising, like David's one of the people that does projects for me, and then there's someone above me that I collaborate with a lot, like, hey, do we need our check-in this week? Is there anything we need to talk about besides these 3 projects? So making sure that it's intentional. And they can be, there could also be these daily quick stand-up meetings where, you get folks together. Usually every Friday, our senior team has a marketing check-in, which is a 20-minute meeting. And, it was funny because our director of marketing said the other day, yeah, are we canceling the meeting again? Because there are these other touch points throughout the week, and we're all individually working on different projects together. and I'll talk more about it in the resource section, but we're big Slackers. Like we use the Slack platform a ton. And there's just like all these cool threads happening with, different pockets of the workforce that we're able to stay connected. And we were having a conversation yesterday, and one of my colleagues was like, why are we on email? We should be on Slack having this conversation. It goes much better. But so just think about what makes sense. And then, this idea for casual interactions as well, because they don't happen organically, because we're not all in the office, and I don't just walk by, David's desk and start to, chit chat with him about, oh, did you watch the Netflix show? Whatever we're sort of chatting about as the sort of hot topic of the day, really think about just a moment for a casual interaction, maybe even within those planned conversations that you either start with so what's going on? How was your weekend? Start with some of those, moments of connection, right? Where you're making that friend at work or building that relationship with your colleague, just to make sure that people are feeling okay, and that they're not feeling too isolated, or they're not having a bad day, because those still happen, right? And then I did mention our, sort of any sort of technology platform. If you're already on Outlook, Microsoft, there's Teams. I hear mixed reviews about Teams, but there's Slack. There's a ton of phone apps, GroupMe, and all these different ones that the quote unquote kids use. But there's things you can do to sort of stay connected, do instant messaging, WhatsApp, whatever you feel like could work. But just finding ways to really sort of connect, and really having a deliberate communications plan. And I'm just going to pause there for a second and just see, is there something that you all are doing outside of what we've suggested here that you think is working for y'all in terms of how you're communicating?
Can I ask a question about this really quick? Because we're actually working on setting up teams, and I'm forcing my way as the communications person into the IT and trying to explain that that's a communications tool, not just file storage. And one of the things we're trying to figure out, I'm trying to address, is those casual interactions. And I know I had a friend that worked at Microsoft, and they had these little teams about, like, one was how to support veterans in the workforce. One was about other projects that weren't necessarily company mission related. And I'm wondering if you have other ideas like that about how, because our biggest issue right now is the siloing of departments. And I'm trying to figure out how to recreate that, like you said, stopping at somebody's desk, or because we're not in meetings with the people that we might have had lunch with before, because we're in different departments and stuff.
Yeah, that's a great question. No, absolutely. And there has to be somebody that sort of leads that, right? And I think that's on my next slide possibly, but we have, so this is a great way to, there we go. So we've actually, even as a team, and what we recommend to our clients is finding ways to, well, you have silos, maybe that's, you don't want to sustain the existing culture, but break down some of those silos, bring people together across departments by creating some really,
well, the siloing is new. That's why we're all like, well, crap. Because before it was all like collaborative, but now we're like, officially you just have your department meeting. You wouldn't ever officially, have development and outpatient therapy meet. Right. Why would they?
Yeah. Okay. So to that extent, I think there's two things. I think there's two things you can do. You can have these very sort of virtually facilitated team building things that bring everyone together. So we've done a couple things. We recommend the museum hack, where it's actually they have a facilitator that takes you through a series of exercises. They break you up into teams, and you can be intentional about, we want to cross team. We don't want the inpatient without, we want everybody mixed in together. And it's this cool guide that walks you through some trivia, some problem solving, some games, and that's structured. One of the other things that we did, we had a movie night, believe it or not. And the idea was that we all agreed to watch a movie on Netflix. It ended up being like not the funnest movie to watch, but we did watch the movie. And then we came together, and the person that was leading it up, our fun committee person, sent everybody popcorn, and that we were able to, so we got it in advance of the movie, and then we were able to sort of watch the movie, and then we came together as a team to actually discuss the movie, right? So again, you've got to figure out, there's this app on probably it's iOS and Android called House Party, where again, you set a time and people come together, much like you would set a all staff luncheon or whatever things you used to do before to bring people together in the workplace, you're just doing it virtually, right? And you're being intentional around it. Somebody's got to lead it. Somebody's got to sort of get behind it. And if there's free ways to do it, like most people have Netflix, and even, for that particular movie, somebody offered, hey, if you don't have Netflix, you can use my login just to watch the movie, and then I'm going to change the password on you, to log you out. But, I think you could do anything. You just have to be thoughtful about it. You have to be thoughtful, and somebody has to plan it and somebody has to execute it. We're also doing a gift exchange. And so we all had to fill out a form about what our interests are. So we're doing a Secret Santa. We have an external, which is actually our marketing director's daughter is, assigning people their Secret Santa. So you do have to, I think you can do it. I think you can continue to figure out what are the behaviors and values that are important pillars in your culture and how you typically work. And then you've got to, create a plan around, okay, here's how we're going to engage people. Here's how we're going to keep people connected. So you just got to come up with much like with anything strategic and intentional in your organization, somebody's got to lead it. Somebody's got to be accountable to it. And then you've got to engage people around it. So, but these are just some resources, and kind of as you kind of start clicking into some of these resources here, I'm sure there'll be other inspirational ideas that come out, because these are just a few that we know of, and so I'm sure there might be others. So, is anybody doing anything outside of what I've suggested, or that's helping sustain their existing culture, keeping people together and sort of making sure silos don't pop up, that they could share with the group?
Hi. This isn't exactly an answer to your question, but kind of. We've got a real small staff of just 4. And we formerly, before all this, had a 2-hour staff meeting every Monday morning to get prepared for the week. So we still have that every Monday, but we started having a daily check-in. It started on Zoom. It's on Zoom. We thought it would be a 15-minute. It's turned into almost an hour, which means now the Monday staff meetings are shorter. But the cool thing is we've got one staff person who is just all business and doesn't want to waste time talking about how was your weekend and how's your dog and anything like that. And now she's leading a lot of the silly conversations because we have a structured scheduled time for that water cooler conversation. Mm-hmm. And so we're actually having more fun and we're more connected because we talk every day about important things and silly things. Yeah. So it's neat.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'd love to hear that, because I just feel like there is, in this moment, we're all feeling some form of isolation. I mean, I was thinking today, when's the last time I left the house? You know what I mean? And just, so I'm in a couple different accountability groups, but I think to the extent that you can really connect with your colleagues and get those ideas and share things, I think you're going to see what you just described, right? You're going to see some difference. You're going to see some changes in folks and how they interact. But I think, to your point, the fact that meeting existed and there was space in that meeting to share some of those personal anecdotal things that are happening, probably inspired that person, right? So yeah. It's just, how do you figure out what to do for your particular organization?
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Other thoughts or questions as we sort of come to the end of our time together? This was the time for Q&A. We've been chatting the way through, but any open questions folks have about anything? Engagement? Key takeaways?
There's an interesting thought here on the chat that someone said they have 2 staff members who are working too hard, essentially, and she can't figure out how to get them to set boundaries.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So a couple thoughts there. That's a great opportunity for a one-on-one with those individuals and getting them to really carve out some time, find out why they're working so hard, what's driving them, see if there's opportunities for them to build in. I literally just had this conversation with one of my clients, you have to take some downtime. If I'm feeling on a Zoom, I came on a Zoom meeting with her on Monday and I was like, whoa, what's wrong? We're not even in the same space, but you could just her body language, her facial expression, just everything about her. She's normally bubbly and effusive, and she usually is fanning herself in the meeting. And I'm like, whoa, what happened? And and, she's burning out. There's been a lot happening in her world. And I'm like, try to take Friday to Monday. It'll all still be here. I promise you. You know what I mean? Like the world is not going to burn down, but I think it's very important to have that one-on-one, pull that person aside and try to help them figure out what's on their plate. What are they working on? What can sort of be reprioritized in terms of a deliverable or a due date, or if it's, they've got a lot of engagement scheduled or meetings scheduled, like, can we shift some of that? Let's redistribute sort of expectations here and give them some space to shut down, because you just got to disconnect at some point. And then even, I just think because of the place that we're in, have them figuring out, okay, what are you doing in your downtime? Go for a walk, do you have a bike? Do you have a dog? Like get them, sometimes you just have to, because we're spending all of our time in our homes now, it's really, how are you disconnecting? How are you even disconnecting from your home space? But I would suggest definitely maybe connecting one-on-one, looking at the sort of workload, workflow, and looking for ways to ease some of that so that they can sort of just take a moment to decompress. There's also wonderful apps, and I know I'm talking to a group of folks that are connected to mental health and therapy in some way, but Calm, Headspace, there's things out there. We have a wonderful person on our team that does a sort of a mindfulness workshop that she put us all through in May, and I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't know I needed that. So there's definitely, I think, things that you can do, but I think I would start with sitting that person down, understanding what's on their plate, and seeing what, if anything, can be shifted.
And don't you think that for everyone, not everyone, people who aren't used to working from home, trying to have that work-home balance when you're used to having those boundaries, like you just you feel like you're always working, even if you're not, because the computer is always there, and you're just checking this one last email, and the dog just threw up, and I've got 2 adult children who their college classes all went online, and they moved home, and all of a sudden all that's happening, and they need help with their stuff, and I think that everybody suffers like that. So you feel like you're on all day long and all night. And I think that's one of the challenges too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree with you like 500%. I'm like, why don't I have time to put in a load of laundry? You know what I mean? Like there's just, it's just piling up there. So yeah, just really sort of, and everybody's here, like I said, Brighter Strategies is a virtual team. Like we've been virtual for, as long as I've been with the organization, but now all of a sudden it's like, both I have two teenage boys, one's in college, one's in high school, but they're here. My husband's here. He used to travel. I'd be like, that was like COVID's putting a little strain on us being in the same space. But yeah, I think to the extent that you can, really help through that sort of social engagement piece and that sort of connectivity piece of, helping sort of, structure some downtime, and then even sharing resources and ideas with folks about how to just get out of their headspace a little bit and get into more sort of relaxed space, whatever that might look like. If it's reading, riding a bike, walking, journaling, like whatever it is, just carving out space for that. So that was a good question. Do we have more questions, Laura?
I think we have one other comment in here about sort of bridging those silos we were talking about. And the idea is that you could set up a coach or mentor groups across departments, and the groups can meet regularly in an unstructured space to help each other with the challenges of the week. In that process, knowledge transfer and resource sharing will likely take place. So the comment on here.
Yeah, excellent comment. David, did you want to add something before we wrap it? David's my colleague from Brighter Strategies.
Hi, that was my comment just in the chat. That's something I've not used at Brighter Strategies as a team's a little bit smaller, but I've used in the past before, and it's great success for getting across areas because you just get to see how they're doing, right? And if you're scheduling the time, that's the thing that is so easily pushed aside. If you don't schedule it, then it won't happen. And so it's really nice to encourage and set up those structures. You can even make it opt in or opt out if people don't want to, but likely they will. So something to play with.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And I think as we close out here in just the last couple of minutes, I think anything that you put some intention or focus around, it's like, I used to hate when I was reading this all the time, but what gets measured gets done, so really put some thought and intention around it. And then do those pulse checks, just check in with folks. Is this right? Is this what you need? And, we have proven as a sort of a global workforce, a national workforce, that we can pivot if we need to. So all of those sort of COVID notions of, no, it's rigid and we have to do it this way and this is the expectation, I think that myth has been debunked. And so when you think about just sort of engaging and motivation for your workforce, it's just really sort of having that conversation, ask people what they need, and see how y'all get to the middle, right? Here's our purpose, here's our capability and resources, here's what you need, let's all get here so we can ultimately head towards our North Star. So, but this was cool. I'm so glad that you all shared your insights. Would love to stay connected to all of you, but hopefully, I know Laura will share the deck and hopefully find the resources helpful.
Yeah, thank you so much for presenting. And I think next we have the optional happy hour from 5 to 6. And then if we don't see you there, we'll hopefully see you tomorrow. So thank you again.
Great.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you all. Take care. Bye-bye.